The wind howls across the Strait of Hormuz. Tankers creep through the narrow waterway. Warships patrol the horizon. On maps, this place is known as one of the most strategic passages on Earth, a bottleneck of global oil, tension, and geopolitics. But thousands of years ago, none of this existed. No ships, no sea, only land. Imagine standing where the waves now crash against the rocky shores of Iran and Oman. The water is gone. In its place stretches a vast valley of dust, stone, and winding rivers. Herds of animals move across the plains. Small bands of humans follow them, carrying tools carved from flint. This is the Strait of Hormuz during the last ice age, and it may have been one of the most important lost landscapes in human history. To understand why, we need to rewind time more than 20,000 years. The world was colder then. Vast ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. Glaciers swallowed entire continents, and because so much water was trapped in ice, global sea levels were dramatically lower, sometimes more than 100 meters below today's level. That single change transformed the geography of the planet. Entire coastlines moved outward for hundreds of kilometers. Islands became mountains in vast plains. Narrow seas turned into dry corridors connecting continents. The Persian Gulf was not a gulf at all. It was land. A massive basin stretching between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian Plateau. Instead of waves and shipping lanes, it contained a broad landscape of rivers, wetlands, and fertile ground, fed by the combined waters of ancient river systems flowing from Mesopotamia. Many scientists now believe this basin may have been one of the most habitable regions in Western Asia during the Ice Age. A kind of hidden oasis, sheltered between mountains and deserts. And at the southeastern edge of that basin lay what we now call the Strait of Hormuz. Today, the strait is about 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Powerful currents surge between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Beneath the surface lies a complicated seabed shaped by tectonic forces and ancient sediment flows. But when sea levels dropped during the Ice Age, that narrow passage may have become something very different. A land bridge. Geologists studying sediment layers beneath the Gulf have found evidence of ancient river channels buried under modern marine deposits. These channels suggest that before the sea returned, enormous rivers once flowed across the exposed basin. One theory proposes that the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, today famous for nourishing ancient Mesopotamia, may once have joined together with other rivers from Iran to form a massive waterway flowing southeast through the Persian Gulf basin. That river system likely emptied somewhere near the modern Strait of Hormuz. In other words, the place where tankers pass today might once have been the mouth of a great Ice Age river. Picture it. A wide valley carved through dry land. Fresh water cutting a path between cliffs of limestone and sandstone. Vegetation clustering along the banks. Reeds, grasses, and trees drawing life from the water. Animals would have gathered here. Gazelles, wild cattle, perhaps even predators like lions or hyenas that once roamed across parts of the Middle East. And where animals gather, humans follow. Archaeologists studying early human migrations have long puzzled over how our ancestors moved between Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the lands of southern Asia. Many migration models focus on coastal routes along the Indian Ocean. Others emphasize inland corridors through the Levant and Mesopotamia. But the Ice Age Persian Gulf basin presents another possibility, one that remained hidden for thousands of years beneath the sea. If the basin truly held rivers, wetlands, and stable freshwater sources, it could have supported large populations of early humans. Instead of a barren desert, the region might have been a lush refuge during harsh climatic periods. A green corridor connecting continents. Evidence supporting this idea has begun to appear in unexpected places. Stone tools found along the coasts of Oman and the United Arab Emirates suggest that humans were present in the region at least 100,000 years ago. These tools belong to technological traditions associated with early modern humans migrating out of Africa. Yet many of the sites where such tools are found today lie along coastlines that would have looked completely different during the Ice Age. Back then, the shore was far away, sometimes hundreds of kilometers beyond the modern coast. Which means the real heart of human activity may now lie underwater, buried beneath layers of sediment in the Persian Gulf basin, including the region around the Strait of Hormuz. Some researchers have even proposed that this lost basin may have functioned as a kind of prehistoric population hub, a stable refuge where human groups could survive climatic fluctuations while other regions became inhospitable. If true, it would mean that the Strait of Hormuz sits above the drowned edge of one of humanity's forgotten homelands, a place where cultures developed, people migrated, and stories unfolded long before the first cities of Mesopotamia ever appeared. But the land did not remain dry forever. As the Ice Age slowly loosened its grip on the planet, temperatures began to rise. Glaciers melted. Oceans expanded. The water began to creeping back toward the basin. At first, the change was gradual, centimeter by centimeter, year by year. Rivers adjusted their courses. Wetlands shifted. Human communities may have simply moved uphill or farther inland. But eventually, the sea returned with unstoppable force. Over thousands of years, the Persian Gulf basin flooded again, transforming valleys into shallow seas and plains into submerged landscapes. The great river systems disappeared beneath saltwater. Ancient campsites vanished. Entire ecosystems were erased. And the narrow corridor we now call the Strait of Hormuz became a gateway between two bodies of water once again. But beneath the waves, the past remains. Ancient riverbeds still lie carved into the seabed. Sediments preserve traces of the environments that once existed there. And somewhere beneath layers of sand and silt may lie the archaeological evidence of the people who once walked that vanished land. For centuries, sailors crossing the strait never imagined what might lie beneath their hulls. But modern science is beginning to uncover the first clues. The Strait of Hormuz is not only a geopolitical choke point, it may also be the drowned entrance to one of the greatest lost landscapes of the Ice Age. And that realization opens the door to a series of mysteries, 6 secrets hidden beneath the water, waiting to be explored. Because if the land once existed, then something lived there. And something happened when the sea came back.
Now imagine this valley again. Not as a barren stretch of sand, but as a living landscape. A river cuts across the basin, not a small stream, but a massive waterway, fed by distant mountains hundreds of kilometers away. Its current moves slowly through wide floodplains. Branches of smaller rivers weave into it like veins, spreading life across the land. This may have been the hidden river valley of the Persian Gulf basin, and the Strait of Hormuz may have been its final gateway to the ocean. To understand this possibility, we have to step into the world of ancient geology. Today, the Persian Gulf is shallow, astonishingly shallow for a body of water this large. In many places, the depth averages only 30 to 40 meters. That alone tells scientists something important. This sea is young, very young in geological terms. If sea levels drop even modestly, huge portions of the Gulf floor become exposed land. During the peak of the last ice age, when oceans were roughly 120 meters lower than today, the entire basin would have been dry. But dryness doesn't mean lifelessness, because water still had to go somewhere. The great rivers of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates, have always flowed southward. Today, they empty into the Persian Gulf near modern Iraq and Kuwait. But during the Ice Age, when the Gulf Basin was dry land, those rivers would not have stopped at the shoreline. They would have continued, flowing farther and farther south across the exposed basin. Some researchers believe these rivers eventually merged with other waterways descending from the Iranian plateau, streams fed by snowmelt and seasonal rainfall from the Zagros Mountains. The result may have been an enormous combined river system. Think of something similar to the Mississippi River Basin, but stretched across what is now the Persian Gulf. This ancient river is sometimes referred to by scientists as the Gulf River. It likely wound through a massive valley cutting across the basin before reaching the lowest point near the southeastern edge, right around where the Strait of Hormuz sits today. There, the river may have formed a wide delta before spilling into the open waters of the Gulf of Oman. If this reconstruction is correct, the Strait of Hormuz during the Ice Age was not a marine channel at all. It was the mouth of a river. And not just any river, a lifeline across one of the harshest regions on Earth. Because outside this basin, much of Arabia was already becoming increasingly dry. Climatic fluctuations during the Ice Age often pushed the Arabian Peninsula towards desert conditions. But river valleys are different. Where fresh water flows, life follows. Along the banks of this ancient Gulf River, the environment may have looked surprisingly lush compared to the surrounding deserts. Seasonal floods would deposit fertile sediment across the plains. Wetlands could form along low-lying areas. Patches of vegetation would spread outward from the riverbanks. Grasslands, shrubs, possibly even small woodlands. These green corridors would have drawn animals from across the region. Wild cattle, gazelles, equids, ancient wild horses and asses. And with them came predators. Lions once roamed parts of the Middle East, so did leopards and hyenas. Fossil evidence shows that these animals thrived in environments with stable prey populations. And wherever prey animals gather near water, humans are never far away. For early human groups living during the Ice Age, access to fresh water was everything. Rivers provided drinking water, edible plants, fish, and reliable animal migration routes. A large river valley could support repeated seasonal visits or even long-term settlement. In other words, the Gulf River Valley may have been an ideal habitat for prehistoric communities. But here's the truly fascinating part. We don't have direct archaeological sites from the basin itself, because the entire landscape is now underwater. Instead, the clues appear along the edges, like fragments of a puzzle scattered around a submerged center. Stone tools have been discovered along the coastlines of Oman and the United Arab Emirates that date back tens of thousands of years. These tools show clear signs of human craftsmanship, carefully shaped blades, flakes, and points used for hunting and processing food. Yet many of these discoveries come from areas that would not have been coastal during the Ice Age. Back then, the shoreline was dramatically farther away, which means the people who made those tools were likely living inland, possibly along the rivers that cross the Gulf Basin. Some researchers have even proposed that early human populations may have clustered in this region for extended periods of time, a kind of prehistoric refuge. During colder, harsher climatic phases, surrounding regions might have become difficult places to survive, but a fertile river valley would remain relatively stable, providing water and resources when other landscapes failed. If this idea is correct, the Persian Gulf Basin may have played a major role in human history, not as a remote wilderness, but as a hub of migration and survival. Groups of humans moving out of Africa and across Arabia could have converged in this basin. Over generations, they might have developed new technologies, shared knowledge, and adapted to changing climates before spreading outward again towards Iran, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. The river valley would have acted as both refuge and crossroads, and the Strait of Hormuz would have been the final doorway between that hidden world and the vast ocean beyond. But landscapes shaped by rivers are never permanent. Rivers shift, flood, carve new channels,
And when the sea begins to rise, river valleys become the first places to disappear. At the end of the last ice age, the planet began warming rapidly. Glaciers melted across North America and Eurasia. Water that had been locked in ice for tens of thousands of years poured back into the oceans. Sea levels began to rise. Slowly at first, then faster. For people living in the Gulf Basin, the changes would have been subtle in the beginning. Shorelines creeping inland over generations, wetlands expanding, salty water beginning to intrude into the lower parts of river valleys. But eventually, the transformation would have become impossible to ignore. Salt water would push upstream, freshwater habitats would shrink, and the ancient river that once flowed through the Strait of Hormuz would begin to drown beneath the returning sea. What had once been a fertile valley was about to become a submerged memory. And for the people who may have lived there, the disappearance of that river valley might have been one of the most dramatic environmental changes they ever experienced.
The storm is coming. Not a storm of wind or thunder, but a storm of water. And the people living in the ancient valley may not have seen it coming fast enough. For thousands of years, the great river of the Persian Gulf basin had been their lifeline. It flowed quietly across the land, feeding wetlands and grasslands. Herds followed its course. Camps rose and fell along its banks. Life was predictable, until the sea began to rise. At the end of the last ice age, the Earth entered one of the most dramatic climate transitions in human history. Glaciers that had dominated the northern hemisphere for tens of thousands of years began collapsing. The meltwater had to go somewhere, and it rushed into the oceans. Between roughly 20,000 and 8,000 years ago, global sea levels rose more than 100 meters. That change may sound gradual on paper, but in geological terms, it was astonishingly fast. Entire coastlines moved inland within a few thousand years. River valleys flooded. Low plains vanished beneath expanding seas. For the people living in the Persian Gulf basin, this meant their world was slowly disappearing. Imagine living beside a river that your ancestors had known for generations. At first, the changes seem small. The lower marshlands begin to turn salty. Fish species change. Plants that once thrived along the banks begin to die off. Then the shoreline creeps closer. Year after year, the river mouth moves upstream as the sea pushes inland. What had once been dry ground becomes tidal mud. Villages must move. Hunting grounds vanish. The animals that once followed predictable migration paths begin to shift elsewhere. And eventually, the river valley itself begins to drown. This transformation may have taken centuries, but for human societies dependent on stable landscapes, it would have been catastrophic. Archaeologists studying submerged prehistoric landscapes around the world have seen similar patterns. In places like the North Sea, entire ancient forests now lie buried beneath the water. Off the coast of India, drowned settlements hint at civilizations displaced by rising seas. The Persian Gulf basin may have experienced something similar, perhaps on an even larger scale. Some scientists believe the flooding of the Gulf occurred in several stages. At first, water slowly seeped into the lowest parts of the basin as sea levels climbed. Marshes expanded, shallow lakes formed, river channels widened into estuaries. But eventually, the rising ocean reached a tipping point. The sea broke through the southeastern edge of the basin near what is now the Strait of Hormuz. When that happened, the transformation accelerated. Salt water surged inward through the narrow corridor. The ancient river valley, once the mouth of a freshwater system, became an open channel for marine water pouring into the basin. Over time, the Persian Gulf filled like a giant bathtub. Water spread northward across the valley floor, swallowing plains, wetlands, and riverbanks.
The fertile landscape that may have supported human communities for thousands of years disappeared beneath the waves. The process likely took several thousand years, but the final stages may have felt incredibly sudden to those living there. Within a few generations, entire regions could have been lost, and with them, the footprints of the people who once lived there. Today, archaeologists searching for traces of those populations face a frustrating reality. The evidence lies underwater. Any settlements, campsites, or activity areas that once existed along the ancient river valley are now buried beneath layers of marine sediment. The deeper parts of the basin may contain meters or even tens of meters of sand and silt deposited after the flooding. This makes direct discovery extremely difficult. Yet, clues still appear around the edges. Stone tools found across the Arabian Peninsula reveal waves of human occupation stretching back tens of thousands of years. Genetic studies of modern populations also suggest that early human groups moved through this region during key migration periods. Some researchers propose that the Gulf Basin acted as a kind of staging ground for those migrations, a place where groups could gather, grow, and adapt before spreading outward. If that theory is correct, the flooding of the Gulf Basin may have triggered one of the most significant population movements in prehistoric history. Imagine thousands of people forced to leave their ancestral lands as water slowly consumed their valley. Groups would migrate north toward Mesopotamia, east toward Iran, south across Arabia, or along the emerging coastlines of the Indian Ocean. These displaced communities may have carried with them knowledge, technologies, and cultural traditions that shaped later civilizations. In a strange way, the drowning of the Gulf Basin could have helped fuel the spread of human societies across Western and Southern Asia. But the evidence for this lost world remains elusive. Most of it lies beneath the waters near the Strait of Hormuz, and that is where modern science has begun looking. In recent decades, marine geologists used sonar mapping and sediment analysis to reconstruct the ancient landscape hidden beneath the Persian Gulf. Their studies reveal old river channels carved deep into the seabed, clear signs that freshwater systems once flowed across land that is now underwater. Some channels appear enormous, suggesting powerful rivers once moved through the basin. Others reveal branching networks of tributaries feeding into a central valley. Together, they paint a picture of a landscape far more complex than the shallow sea we see today. Yet perhaps the most intriguing question remains unanswered. If people lived there, where are their settlements? Are they buried beneath layers of sediment near the ancient riverbanks? Are they hidden beneath submerged terraces along the basin's edges? Or do they lie deeper still, beneath the shifting sands near the Strait of Hormuz itself? The possibility is both thrilling and frustrating, because somewhere beneath the water, there may be evidence of human communities that vanished when the sea returned. Entire chapters of human history erased by rising tides. And if those traces are ever discovered, they could transform our understanding of how early humans survived, migrated, and adapted during one of the most dramatic environmental changes the planet has ever experienced. For now, the Strait of Hormuz guards those secrets carefully. Beneath the shipping lanes, beneath the currents and the noise of modern geopolitics, the drowned valley waits.
The water didn't just rise, it advanced. Slow, silent, relentless. Year after year, the shoreline crept farther into the ancient valley. At first, the people living along the great river may barely have noticed. A marsh expands here, a sandbank disappears there. The tide pushes a little farther upstream. Small changes, nothing alarming. But the ocean had already begun its long invasion. At the height of the last ice age, so much water was locked inside glaciers that sea levels were dramatically lower.
When the climate warmed, that balance collapsed. Ice sheets melted across North America, Scandinavia, and Siberia. The oceans began swelling. This global rise in sea level was not steady. Scientists studying ancient shorelines have identified periods when the ocean surged upward in sudden pulses, events known as meltwater pulses. During these episodes, sea level could rise several meters within only a few centuries. For people living in coastal valleys, that meant the landscape could change dramatically within the span of a few generations. The Persian Gulf basin was particularly vulnerable. It was shallow, flat, and enormous. As the sea advanced through the southeastern opening near the Strait of Hormuz, the water had a clear pathway into the basin. What had once been the mouth of a river slowly transformed into a marine channel. Salt water began pushing upstream against the current. The ancient Gulf River fought back for a time. Fresh water still flowed south from the Tigris, Euphrates, and rivers of the Zagros Mountains. The combined flow may have created vast estuaries, complex environments where fresh water and salt water mixed. But the ocean kept coming, and eventually the river lost the battle. When marine water flooded deeper into the basin, the transformation accelerated. Freshwater wetlands turned into salty lagoons. Vegetation adapted or died. Animals dependent on freshwater ecosystems were forced to migrate elsewhere. For humans, the consequences were devastating. Imagine a settlement built beside the river where families had hunted, fished, and gathered plants for generations. One year, the floods are stronger than usual. The next year, the soil tastes slightly salty. Crops begin to fail. Fish disappear. The river smells different. The land feels different. Then the storms arrive. As the sea pushes inland, tidal forces reshape the valley. New currents carve channels through the floodplain. Storm surges sweep across low ground. Temporary islands appear where hills once stood. Eventually, the water surrounds them. The valley becomes a shallow inland sea. This is how the Persian Gulf was born. Geological evidence suggests that the basin filled gradually over thousands of years, but the final stages may have happened surprisingly quickly. Once the water crossed certain thresholds, entire regions of land could disappear within a few human lifetimes. For the people who may have lived in the basin, this would not have been an abstract geological process. It would have been a crisis. Communities forced to move again and again as the water advanced, hunting territories shrinking, familiar landscapes vanishing beneath expanding tides. And eventually, there would be nowhere left to go within the basin. The people would have scattered. Some likely moved north into Mesopotamia, following the rivers that still flowed across fertile plains. Others may have migrated along the emerging coastlines of Arabia, adapting to life along a changing shoreline. Still others might have traveled east toward Iran and beyond. Wherever they went, they carried memories of a world that no longer existed. And those memories may have survived longer than the land itself. Across many cultures in the Middle East, ancient stories speak of great floods and drowned lands. The most famous of these is the Mesopotamian flood narrative that later became part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that would eventually echo through later traditions, including the biblical story of Noah. Of course, these legends are separated by thousands of years from the flooding of the Persian Gulf basin, but some researchers wonder whether such flood myths might preserve distant echoes of real environmental disasters experienced by prehistoric communities. The sudden disappearance of a fertile homeland beneath rising seas would certainly leave a deep mark on collective memory, even if the details changed over time, even if the story transformed as it passed through generations. The idea of a drowned world is not unique to the Middle East. Across the globe, cultures tell stories of lands swallowed by water. Doggerland in the North Sea, the submerged plains of Sundaland in Southeast Asia, ancient coastal valleys off the shores of India and Australia. All of these places once supported human populations during the Ice Age, and all were lost when sea levels rose. The Persian Gulf basin may belong to that same category of vanished landscapes. an ancient homeland erased by the ocean. But unlike many other submerged regions, the Gulf Basin sits in one of the most politically and economically sensitive waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow corridor. Massive tankers glide above waters that conceal an ancient valley beneath them. Few people crossing the strait realize that they may be traveling over a drowned landscape once inhabited by early humans. Yet modern technology is slowly beginning to reveal the outlines of that hidden world. High-resolution sonar mapping of the seabed has detected ancient drainage systems buried beneath layers of sediment. Some channels are kilometers wide, clear evidence of large river systems that once carved through the basin. Geologists have also identified sediment deposits consistent with ancient floodplains and wetlands. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. But the most important clues may still be missing, because finding geological features is one thing, finding human traces is another. Stone tools, campsites, fire pits, buried artifacts. If such evidence exists under the Persian Gulf, it could revolutionize our understanding of early human life in this region. It would confirm that the basin was not simply a river valley, but a human landscape, a place where people lived, adapted, and eventually fled as the sea returned. For now, those answers remain hidden, somewhere beneath the waters near the Strait of Hormuz.
The ships glide across the Strait of Hormuz. Gigantic oil tankers, naval vessels, cargo ships carrying goods across continents. Above the water, the modern world hums with industry and strategy. But beneath those hulls, there is another world. A silent landscape buried under layers of sand and sediment. Ancient river valleys carved into stone. Floodplains long erased by rising seas. And perhaps, just perhaps, evidence of human lives that vanished when the ocean returned. For decades, this hidden past remained almost impossible to study. The Persian Gulf is not a typical archaeological site. It lies underwater, in politically sensitive territory, crossed by some of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. Excavating such a place is extraordinarily difficult, but science has begun to find ways to peek beneath the surface. One of the most powerful tools used by marine researchers today is seafloor sonar mapping. Ships equipped with multi-beam sonar systems send thousands of sound pulses toward the seabed. These pulses bounce back, allowing computers to reconstruct detailed maps of the underwater landscape. When scientists began applying this technology to the Persian Gulf basin, they found something remarkable. The seabed wasn't flat. Instead, it was etched with long, winding channels, clear signatures of ancient rivers that once flowed across exposed land. Some of these channels stretch for dozens of kilometers. Others branch like tree roots, forming complex drainage networks. These patterns are unmistakable. They resemble the river systems seen on dry land today, except they lie buried beneath shallow seawater. One particularly large channel runs through the central Gulf Basin toward the southeastern outlet near the Strait of Hormuz. This may be part of the ancient Gulf River system that once drained the entire region. The discovery confirms what geologists had suspected for years. Before the sea returned, this area was a vast landscape shaped by flowing water. But mapping ancient rivers only answers part of the mystery. The bigger question remains: did people live there? To answer that, researchers are now turning to a combination of geological sampling and underwater exploration. Sediment cores, long cylindrical samples extracted from the seabed, allow scientists to look back through time. Each layer of sediment contains clues about the environment that existed when it was deposited. Some layers contain marine shells and microscopic ocean organisms. Others contain pollen from land plants, fragments of soil, or traces of freshwater ecosystems. By analyzing these layers,
scientists can reconstruct the history of the Gulf Basin as it transformed from dry land into a sea. In several studies, researchers have identified clear transitions from river sediments to marine deposits, evidence of the moment when seawater flooded into the basin. But occasionally, the sediment cores reveal something even more intriguing: tiny fragments of charcoal, particles that may have come from ancient fires. If confirmed, such traces could suggest human activity somewhere in the surrounding landscape before the basin flooded. Of course, charcoal alone is not proof of settlement. Natural fires can also leave similar traces. But discoveries like this hint that the story of the Gulf Basin may be more complex than once believed. Another line of investigation focuses on the edges of the basin, the places where land meets water today. These coastal zones may hold the key to locating prehistoric settlements. When sea levels rose, the lowest parts of the basin flooded first. People living there would have retreated toward higher ground along the basin's edges. Over time, those edge regions became the new coastlines, which means archaeological sites located along today's coasts may represent the final stages of human occupation before the basin was completely submerged. And indeed, researchers working in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Oman have discovered prehistoric sites dating back thousands of years. Some of these sites show evidence of fishing communities that adapted to the newly formed coastline of the Persian Gulf. Others contain stone tools and remains of ancient camps that predate the full flooding of the basin. Together, these discoveries support the idea that humans were present in the region during the critical period when sea levels were rising. But the most dramatic evidence may still lie underwater. In other parts of the world, submerged archaeological sites have already been discovered in former Ice Age landscapes. Off the coast of Britain, researchers have mapped the drowned plains of Doggerland, where Mesolithic communities once lived before the North Sea flooded the area. In the Mediterranean, underwater caves preserve evidence of prehistoric human activity along coastlines that existed thousands of years ago. And in Southeast Asia, scientists are investigating submerged river systems that once crossed the vast plains of Sunderland, another Ice Age landscape lost to rising seas. These discoveries prove that submerged prehistoric worlds can be studied and sometimes even excavated. The challenge is locating them. And that brings us back to the Strait of Hormuz. Because if the ancient Gulf River truly flowed through this corridor, then the surrounding region may contain some of the most promising sites for future underwater archaeology. Buried terraces along the ancient riverbanks, submerged rock shelters once used by early humans, or perhaps even the remains of settlements that stood beside the river before the sea arrived. Modern exploration technology is improving rapidly. Autonomous underwater vehicles, robotic submarines equipped with cameras and sensors, can now scan vast areas of seafloor in remarkable detail. These machines can detect unusual shapes or anomalies that might indicate buried structures or artifacts. Satellite data is also helping researchers identify subtle geological patterns that reveal ancient landscapes hidden beneath the sea. Piece by piece, scientists are reconstructing the drowned world of the Persian Gulf Basin, but the work has only begun. Every new discovery raises more questions. How large were the human populations that may have lived there? How long did they occupy the basin before the flooding forced them out? And could evidence of their lives still lie hidden beneath the sediments near the Strait of Hormuz? The answers may change our understanding of early human history in this part of the world. Because if the basin truly served as a refuge for prehistoric populations, then the Strait of Hormuz is not only a gateway for modern ships, it is also the doorway to one of humanity's lost landscapes, a place where ancient rivers once flowed, and where the past may still be waiting to be found.
The sonar screen flickers. Lines begin to form across the display, long, winding shapes stretching across the seabed beneath the Strait of Hormuz. At first, they look like scratches in the sand. But then, the pattern becomes clearer. A valley, a channel, a river that no longer exists. For scientists studying the Persian Gulf basin, moments like this feel like glimpses into another world, a world hidden beneath shallow water, buried under thousands of years of sediment and salt. And the deeper they look, the more the landscape of the past begins to emerge. Modern research vessels now carry an arsenal of technology designed to explore places humans cannot easily reach. Multi-beam sonar sweeps the seafloor with precise acoustic mapping. Sub-bottom profilers send sound waves deep into sediment layers, revealing structures buried beneath the surface. Autonomous underwater vehicles glide silently through the water, photographing the seabed in high resolution. Together, these tools are slowly reconstructing the geography of the Persian Gulf before the sea returned. What they reveal is astonishing. The basin floor contains the unmistakable fingerprints of ancient rivers, massive drainage channels carved into the landscape when it was dry land. Some channels measure several kilometers wide, suggesting that enormous volumes of fresh water once flowed through the region. Others reveal intricate branching patterns typical of floodplains and tributaries. These discoveries confirm what scientists suspected for decades. The Persian Gulf basin was once a vast river valley. But the most intriguing clues lie near the southeastern outlet of that valley, around the modern Strait of Hormuz. Here, sonar mapping has detected submerged terraces and geological formations that may mark the edges of the ancient river mouth. These terraces could represent former shorelines or floodplain edges that existed before the basin flooded. In other words, the seabed near the strait may preserve a snapshot of the moment when the river valley transformed into a sea. But geology is only the first layer of the mystery. The real question, the one that excites archaeologists the most, is whether traces of human life still remain hidden within that drowned landscape. Because if people lived along the river valley, they would have left behind signs. Stone tools, animal bones, fragments of hearths where fires once burned. Perhaps even the foundations of primitive shelters or campsites. The problem is that these traces are now buried beneath thousands of years of sediment. When the Persian Gulf flooded, marine currents began depositing layers of sand and silt across the basin floor. Over millennia, these layers accumulated, sealing the ancient landscape beneath them like pages inside a geological archive. In some areas, sediment deposits may be several meters thick. This makes locating archaeological sites extremely challenging. Yet scientists are beginning to develop new methods to overcome that challenge. One approach involves scanning the seabed for anomalies, small disturbances in sediment layers that might indicate buried objects or structures. Advanced imaging techniques can detect subtle changes in density beneath the seafloor, revealing shapes that differ from natural geological formations. Another method uses underwater drilling to extract sediment cores from targeted locations. These cores allow researchers to analyze not only environmental changes, but also microscopic evidence of human presence. For example, certain chemical signatures can reveal whether ancient fires once burned in the region. Traces of charcoal, ash, or burnt plant material may indicate that humans occupied the area before the flooding. In some cases, pollen grains preserved within sediments can reveal the types of vegetation that once grew along the ancient riverbanks. Such data helps scientists reconstruct the environment that early humans may have experienced. A landscape of wetlands, river channels, and grasslands. A place where animals gathered, where fresh water flowed, where people could survive.
But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this research is the possibility that the Persian Gulf basin served as a migration hub during key moments in human prehistory. For decades, scientists studying early human dispersal have debated the routes our ancestors used when leaving Africa and spreading across Eurasia. Some migrations followed the Mediterranean coast. Others moved inland through the Levant. But the Arabian Peninsula may also have played a crucial role. During wetter climatic phases, parts of Arabia supported lakes and rivers that allowed human populations to expand deeper into the region. If the Persian Gulf basin contained a stable river system during the Ice Age, it could have acted as a central corridor connecting these migration routes. Groups moving from Africa into Arabia may have encountered this fertile basin and settled there temporarily. Over generations, they could have adapted to local environments before continuing east toward South Asia or north toward the Iranian plateau. In that sense, the drowned landscape beneath the Strait of Hormuz might represent a crossroads in the story of humanity, a place where ancient journeys converged, where cultures evolved, and where entire populations may have thrived before the rising sea forced them to move again. Today, the strait is one of the most politically sensitive waterways on Earth. Oil tankers, naval patrols, and international tensions dominate the headlines. Yet beneath that modern drama lies a much older story. A story written in stone and sediment. A story of rivers that once flowed where ships now pass, of landscapes that vanished beneath rising tides, of people who walked across plains that no longer exist. And somewhere beneath the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, the final pieces of that story may still be waiting, hidden, silent, preserved beneath the sea for thousands of years, waiting for the moment that science finally uncovers them and reveals the lost secrets of the world that existed here during the last great ice age.